So the purpose of the training is to introduce you guys all to the outfall inspection and stormwater sampling procedures of the 2016 MS4 permit. This diagram sort of gives you the flow path of how you guys are going to go about your business with this new permit when it becomes effective. You're going to rank your outfalls. You're going to do some dry weather screening. Once you've got the information from your dry weather screening, you're going to re-rank your outfalls. You're going to do some more investigations of the catchment systems. You're going to update your mapping. You're going to remove any illicit connections that you may find, and then you're going to do some follow-up screening after that to make sure you've gotten rid of all your illicits, and then at that point your system will be fully investigated, and that is obviously not going to happen overnight. What are illicit discharges? If you don't know already, illicit discharges are anything that enters your system that is not stormwater. So that could include illegal floor drain connections. It could include sewer laterals that were connected improperly, failing septic systems, and also grass clippings, leaf litter, anything dumped into a catch basin illegally. See a lot of dog waste in baggies deposited in catch basins if you are out there doing any of the catch basin cleanings. There are some allowable non-stormwater discharges. So these are all permitted and allowable discharges to your stormwater system. So here's where we start talking about the timelines for getting all this stuff done. So in the first year from the effective date of the permit, which is next July 1st, correct? You will have to have a written IDD plan, a written illicit discharge detection elimination plan, and you will have to have your primary outfall ranking complete. And so as part of that outfall ranking, you will be ranking your outfalls as either problem, high priority, low priority, or exempt. Your problem outfalls are the ones you already know you have potential illicit connections. So the permit gives you the opportunity to take care of those illicit discharges. You don't have to do outfall screening at those because you already know you have a problem at those. Then the high priority would be areas where you've had complaints in the past, you've had sanitary sewer overflows in the past, any place you may suspect that you may possibly have an illicit discharge, you would put those in the high category. Then you have a low priority category under that, and then the exempt ones are outfalls that you don't have to do screening for. If you have, say, like a town forest and there's no sewer infrastructure that runs through the road that goes by the town forest, and you got a couple catch basins in there and an outfall, those would become exempt because they have really no possible way of having an illicit connection to them. After those are done, a year and a half, 18 months after the permit effective date, you also have to have a catchment investigation procedure in place. So as part of this permit, which is new compared to the 2003 permit, you will have to investigate your catchment systems. No longer is it sufficient just to look at your outfalls. EPA and Mass DEP wants you to understand your entire system. So there's a catchment investigation where you'll be going up your catchments to the major key junction manholes and looking for illicit connections there as well. After 3 years of the effective date, your dry weather outfall screening needs to be complete. Once your dry weather screening is complete, then you will re-rank your outfalls based on the information gathered as part of that dry weather screening. And then 7 years from the effective date of the permit, you're going to be completing your catchment investigations and all your problem catchments. So these would be your investigations and your problem catchments that you have known illicit connections, going through the catchment, doing any wet weather sampling that you may have to do prescribed under this permit, and then eliminating those illicit connections. And then all your catchment investigations need to be completed 10 years from the effective date of the permit. So the dry weather outfall screening. So for each outfall, which you will have mapped as part of your compliance with your 2003 permit, you're going to be going out to each outfall, and at each outfall you're going to be recording information like giving it a unique identifier, what the receiving water is, the date of the most recent inspection, which may be the inspection you are currently undertaking, the dimensions of the outfall, the shape of the outfall, the spatial location of it, which is key in mapping your infrastructure. It only has to have plus or minus 30 feet accuracy, so handheld GPS units that you buy at any big box store are sufficient for compliance with this permit. You want to note the physical condition of the outfall. And then you start to get into the evidence of non-stormwater flows, odor, sewage, sulfur, sour, rancid milk, smelling things, petroleum, gas smells, and then visual indicators, color, turbidity in the water, floatables, suds, toilet paper is a very common one, or an oily sheen. The evidence of non-stormwater flows, you will know it when you see it. So as part of that dry weather outfall screening, if you do come across an outfall that does have flow during dry weather, you are now required to take at least one sample from that outfall during dry weather. Dry weather is any period of time where you've had less than 1/10 of an inch of rain over the last 24 hours. So today would not count, obviously, because we've had some rain this morning. And then this is the laundry list of parameters that you need to sample for: ammonia, chlorine, conductivity, salinity, E. coli, surfactants, temperature, and any pollutants of concern. The pollutants of concern, these would be pollutants specified in any TMDL for the specific water body that may be in your town. So in the Charles, it would be phosphorus. In some of the Boston area communities, they have TMDLs for bacteria, so that would be a pollutant of concern, but they're covered in the initial list of parameters that you have to sample for. All these parameters, except for E. coli, can be done using handheld meters or test kits or test strips. You need to pay attention to the language in the permit, specifically for chlorine. You have to use a test that has a minimum detection limit of 0.02 milligrams per liter, or 20 micrograms per liter of chlorine. So that's a very low level test. So pay attention to the wording in the permit, and pay attention to the labels on the test kits and stuff you're looking to potentially purchase. It's very important. E. coli is the one parameter that needs to be analyzed under an EPA certified method. This is something you're more than likely going to contract out to a lab to do. They will supply you with the bottles. They will be sterile bottles. And the one thing to remember with E. coli sampling is that is the one parameter where you have a hold time. So samples need to be delivered to the laboratory within 6 hours of the point with which they were taken. So that dictates how many samples you can get to in a day. You're not going to be able to do 20, 30 samples in a day, because you only have 6 hours from the first sample you take to get the rest of them, to get all your samples that day to the laboratory. So it does take some pre-planning on your part when you're going out and doing this sampling. So likely sewer input indicators. So the permit does specify this. This is in one of the footnotes. You have a likely sewer input if you have any olfactory or visual evidence. So if you see toilet paper, or if you have any smells that would indicate sewage. You also have a potential illicit connection if you have ammonia greater than 0.5 milligrams per liter, 0.25 milligrams per liter of surfactants, and bacteria levels greater than the water quality criteria applicable to that receiving water. So it needs to have all three, not just one. And then similarly, if you have ammonia over 0.5 milligrams per liter, surfactants over 0.25 milligrams per liter, and you have detectable levels of chlorine, and this goes back to what I was talking about the detection limit of that test being very low. If you do get a detectable level of chlorine with the other two parameters, then you have a potential for an illicit connection in that catchment. So some of the sampling equipment that you may need when you're out in the field: clipboard, field sheets, chain of custody forms. So if you're delivering samples to a lab, or if you're taking your samples back to your own facility and somebody else is going to be handling them, you want a chain of custody so you can track who has had control of that sample from the time it was taken till the time it was analyzed. Pens, pencils, permanent markers for writing on sample bottles, filling out field sheets. Write in the rain notebook. Sometimes you are going to have to do wet weather sampling. You need to be able to take notes in the field when it's wet. Those are excellent for that. Nitrile gloves. You are looking for illicit connections to your storm drain system. There are going to be places where you may have raw sewage discharging from your stormwater system. You're going to want to wear gloves. You need a cooler with ice for transporting your samples, digital camera for taking pictures of the sampling, recording the condition of your outfalls, personal protective equipment. I see some of you are wearing it currently. Reflective vests, safety glasses, boots, waders, label tape for labeling your sample bottles. I implore you to put your label tape on and write on your sample bottles before you start adding water to them. It becomes much more difficult. The writing, no matter what marker you use, starts smearing. Remember that little tip when you're out in the field. You'll need a pry bar or pick or something to be able to lift manhole covers. In the field portion of this, you'll see an outfall that's inundated. If you go to do an outfall screening and your outfall is partially inundated by the receiving water, you have to go up in the system to find a location in a manhole where that receiving water is no longer interfering with your dry weather inspection. So you will need a pick or something to be able to lift those manhole covers. Sandbags and 50 feet of cord for damming flow, for taking water samples in manholes. A small mallet or hammer to help remove those manhole covers. Utility knife, hand sanitizer, zip ties, duct tape are always nice to have around. You never know when you have to fix a piece of field equipment when you're in the field. And rubber boots and waders. More supplies you're going to need. You're going to need your clean testing containers. Small, if you're going to be doing your tests in the field, you need small plastic or glass beakers so you can pour your sample in those containers, use your test strip, do your test kit. You will need waste buckets for any of the test kits that have ampules or solutions. You need to dispose of all that properly. You need bags to put your spent test strips in. You have to wash that container between samples with triple rinse of deionized water, triple rinse of the sample water. So you need a place for all that, dispose of all of that as well if you're going to be doing that stuff in the field. You need sample collection bottles. Some will be supplied by the laboratory if you choose to go that route, especially for E. coli. You need some cleaning and disinfecting wash bottles. You need a sampling pole, a dipper, or a sampling cage so you can take the sample, and you'll see more of that in the field portion. So a general sampling procedure when you're out in the field, you will identify the outfall you want to sample. You'll probably have taken the time to identify a number of outfalls that you're going to sample or inspect in a given day. You'll fill out as much of the information on the field sheets and the sample bottles as you can before you actually take the sample. You will conduct your visual and olfactory investigation. You will put on your gloves to take your sample. If you're using a dipper, as I was mentioning before, you need to triple rinse the dipper in distilled water and then triple rinse it in the water that you were going to sample to make sure that all the water that is going in your sample bottle is representative of that receiving water body and is not contaminated in any way. You need to collect the sample. Specifies here, do not disturb the sediments. So if you disturb sediments and you get sediments in your sample bottle, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with artificially high readings for a number of your parameters, specifically bacteria and phosphorus if that is one of your constituents that you have to test for. Be prepared. This is going to force you to know your system, know the areas you are working in and have a plan. Set a goal for yourself, the number of outfalls you want to visit in a day. You know, this is not building roads. You are going to be walking through forests and wetlands and marshes to get to a lot of these outfalls. So plan ahead for what you are going to have to endure in any day out in the field. Always send people out in twos. Don't send the intern out by themselves to go complete this sampling. It's not safe and it's less efficient. Some safety concerns that you might have in the field, as I was mentioning before, water quality. You are looking for potential raw sewage. Ticks, bees, hornets, wasps, mosquitoes, deer ticks especially. If you're walking through the forest or woods, wear light colored clothing. You're going to get ticks on you. It's going to be part of the plan, unfortunately. Poison ivy, there's a ton of it out here. When you're walking around, if anybody doesn't know what it looks like, let me know, I'll show you. I found out last Wednesday the effects of poison ivy. You can probably see it on my eye. Excessive heat, make sure you have a lot of water. And if people are feeling dizzy or lightheaded, that you're stopping sampling for the day, slips, trips, and falls. The most common injury out in the field are slips, trips, and falls. Drowning is something to be aware of. You are sampling around water. And getting stuck in the mud. These outfalls aren't always going to be easily accessed, so you need a way to get people out. This is an OSHA standard. You need to provide life jackets if you have a water depth greater than 2 feet. If you're going to be working from a boat, you need to have a ring that is tossable with a line attached to it. Weather-related hazards, always check the weather. Lightning storms, obviously, you don't want to be sampling in lightning storms. As I mentioned before, dry weather is less than 1/10 of an inch in 24 hours. The wet weather standard in this permit, there is no magic number for wet weather. What you need is for wet weather sampling, you need to have flow coming from your outfalls in order to take the sample. If you do find a potential illicit connection, you will have a written procedure for how to eliminate that. Follow that procedure. Some of the ways you can do that are the sewer dogs, sandbagging, smoke testing, dye testing, and the more expensive CCTV of your system. And there's some useful links that'll be in the presentation for everybody later.